Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Honorable Madam Justice Yonette Cummins Edwards, Acting Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, the Honorable Madam Justice Roxanne George, Acting Chief Justice of the Judiciary of Guyana, the Honorable Justices of Appeal of the Court of Appeal of Guyana, the Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court of Judicature of Guyana, and the Honorable Judges of the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago, sitting in this special sitting of the full Court of the Court of Appeal to pay tribute to the memory of the late Madam Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, OC, CCH, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana and retired Judge of the Caribbean Court of Appeal of Justice.
President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders, Honorable Chancellor of the Judiciary, Acting, Madam Justice Yonette Cummins Edwards, Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Mahabir Anil Nandalal, Honorable Chief Justice Acting, Madam Justice Roxanne George, Honorable Justice Dio Rishi Prasad, Justice of Appeal of Guyana, Honorable Madam Justice Charmaine Pemberton, Justice of Appeal of Trinidad and Tobago, Honorable Judges of the High Court of the Supreme Court of Guyana, and Honorable Madam Justice Nadia Kangaloo, Judge of the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago, Commissioners of Title, Chief Magistrate Acting, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Sir Dennis Byron, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary, Mr. Justice Carl Singh, retired Judges of the Court of Appeal, retired Judges of the High Court, Senior Counsel, President of the Guyana Bar Association, members of the Bar, Ms. Carol Ann Bernard, the daughter and the relatives of Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, special invitees. Good afternoon and welcome to the special sitting of the full Court of the Supreme Court of Judicature to pay tribute to the memory of the Honorable Madam Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, OR, CCH, retired Judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice and retired Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana. This afternoon, I will take you through the order of speeches for this special full court sitting of the court. The Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Mahabir Anil Nandalal, Senior Counsel, will be our first speaker. He will be followed by the Director of Public Prosecution, Mistress Shalimar Alihap, Senior Counsel, the President of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, Ms. Alana Lal, President of the Bar Association of Guyana, Mr. Ronald Bird Smith. They will be followed by Justice Carl Singh, former Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, Sir Dennis Byron, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Professor Kenneth Benjamin, retired Chief Justice of Belize, Mr. Hari Narayan Ramkaran, Senior Counsel, and then Mr. Nigel Hughes, Attorney at Law. Then will follow the Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and the Honorable Madam Chief Justice Roxanne George, and the Honorable Chancellor, Madam Justice Yonette Cummins Edwards, will bring our proceedings to a close in terms of speeches. I now invite the Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Mahabir Anil Nandalal, Senior Counsel, to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Chancellor of the Judiciary, Chief Justice, Justice of Appeal, both of Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, Judges of the High Court of both Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Ombudsman, the Solicitor General, Chief Parliamentary Counsel, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary, retired judges of the Supreme Court, members of the Inner Bar, members of the Outer Bar, commissioners of title, magistrates, president and members of the Guyana Bar Association, Carol Ann Bernard, daughter of the late Justice Desiree Bernard and other relatives, I stand before you to render my tribute to the Honorable Madam Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard of the Order of Roraima and the Cacique Crown of Honor, who departed this mortal existence on the 28th of March, 2024. She was 85 years old. Her illustrious legal career spanned more than 5 decades. Justice Bernard has certainly etched her name in the annals of legal history of Guyana, the Caribbean, and indeed the Commonwealth. Her contribution and accomplishments have inspired generations of women, certainly in Guyana and the Caribbean. I'll be bold to assert that perhaps more than any other, Justice Bernard is largely responsible today for the high number of females in the legal profession in Guyana and the Caribbean, and similarly for the high numbers of women holding judicial positions in both the upper and lower judiciary. I know for a fact that Justice Bernard was the mentor of and has inspired Madam Chancellor, your good self, the Honorable Chief Justice, and I know Chief Justice of Belize, Louise Esther Blenman, who may be joining us on Zoom. And that's just 3 off the bat. Justice Bernard was born in Georgetown on the 2nd of March, 1939, and from an early age began to exhibit scholarship and academic excellence. After writing common entrance at the St. Ambrose Primary School, she was awarded a place at Bishop's High School, the premier girls' school in the colony at the time. She became part of that famous group taught by Sir Fred Wills, who read law at the University of Guyana from Georgetown through a correspondence program. In 1963, having eventually traveled to London, she graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree with honors. In 1964, she qualified as a solicitor and returned to British Guyana, where she commenced her practice of law with the firm of Cameron and Shepherd. In 1970, she was appointed a magistrate. In 1976, she became a commissioner of oaths, and in 1977, she was admitted to the English roll of solicitors. Justice Desiree Bernard is one who can best be described as a trailblazer, as she has been on a regular basis, accomplishing many firsts in her long, stellar legal career. In 1976, she became the first woman to be elected as president of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Association. In 1980, she was the first woman to be appointed a High Court judge in Guyana and the Caribbean. In 1982, she became the first woman to serve on the Judicial Service Commission. In 1992, she was the first woman to be appointed a Justice of Appeal in Guyana and the Caribbean. The same year, she became the first female Chancellor of the Anglican Diocese of Guyana and the Caribbean. In 1996, Justice Bernard was the first woman appointed as Chief Justice of Guyana and in the Commonwealth Caribbean. In 2001, she became the first woman to be appointed as Chancellor and head of the Judiciary of Guyana and in the Commonwealth Caribbean. Then on March 6, 2005, Justice Bernard took the oath of office as a judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. During her tenure from 2005 to 2014, she remained the only female judge of the CCJ. In 2011, she was also appointed a judge of the Inter-American Development Bank Administrative Tribunal. After retiring from the CCJ, Justice Bernard was appointed to the Bermuda's Court of Appeal in 2014. Justice Bernard was also a founder member and the first president of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, which was established in 1987. She was also the first chairperson of the Georgetown Legal Aid Clinic, an organization that she helped to establish and remain a member until her death. Unexpectedly, Justice Bernard made a significant contribution to the jurisprudence of Guyana and the Caribbean, as evidenced by her many judgments being published in the Law Reports of Guyana, the West Indian Law Reports, and the Commonwealth Law Reports. Justice Bernard's judgments were scholarly, yet simple, well-researched, and carefully reasoned. Her analysis of complex issues of law were clear, clinical, and cogent, and very simple to assimilate by students, lawyers, and judges alike. I got the distinct impression that Her Honor was never afraid to put pen to paper. Most importantly, most of her judgments not only withstood appellate scrutiny, but have withstood the test of time. Today, they remain locus classicus decisions on the areas of law upon which they pronounced. Justice Bernard was adept in almost every area of the law. Her many scholarly judgments spanned various areas of civil, criminal, public, and the law. I will bottle minority shareholders' interests, derivative actions, and various aspects of the fiduciary duty owed by a director to a company. In an application by Aubrey Norton for writs of certiorari and prohibition, reported at 1996-1997 Guyana Law Report, page 373, Justice Bernard demonstrated her mettle and fearlessness as Chief Justice of Guyana. This case was filed in the aftermath of the 1997 general and regional elections. Violence and mass protests erupted in the streets. The High Court was surrounded by protesters as the case was being heard. The case was a challenge by the opposition against the swearing-in as Executive President of Guyana of Janet Jagan, the People's Progressive Party's presidential candidate. The chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission had declared Janet Jagan President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Orders were granted to prohibit her from assuming the office of president, preventing the Chancellor of the Judiciary from swearing her in. The allegations were that there were discrepancies and errors in certain aspects of the results, but the Guyana Election Commission had made a decision that the People's Progressive Party had obtained by that time an unassailable lead, which could not have been affected by the votes left to be counted. That was the factual matrix out of which the challenge was born. In a historic ruling, Justice Bernard ruled that the court's jurisdiction was ousted by Article 177 of the Constitution from hearing and determining any question as to the validity of an election of a president, and that an instrument executed under the hand of the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission was conclusive evidence that the person so named was elected, and no question as to the validity of that election as the president shall be inquired into in any court. In arriving at this destination, Justice Bernard carefully examined a series of cases from Guyana, the United Kingdom, the Caribbean, and other Commonwealth territories, and the views of various text writers on ouster clauses including Professor Albert Fiaggio in his book Commonwealth Caribbean Public Law, the Smith and Judicial Review of Administrative Action, and Professor Wade on administrative perilous circumstances, that decision was accepted and never appealed. In Ray Hanneman, 1999, 65 West Indian Report, Justice Bernard addressed the issue of the importance of public authority to give reasons for their decisions. Today, many statutes, our Judicial Review Act, for example, mandates the giving of reasons by public authorities. In 1999, the position was different, but Justice Bernard was speaking about the desirability to provide reasons when public officers make decisions. Her Honor posited thus, public officials, I quote, charged with the responsibility of making decisions, particularly involving the exercise of a discretion, must do so with fairness and give reasons for the exercise of the discretion so that it can be ascertained whether the discretion was exercised reasonably and according to Lord Green, Master of the Rolls in Wensbury, within the four corners of the principles he enumerated thereof. The exercise of discretion is rooted and grounded in the need and duty to act fairly. This does not mean that the court must decide whether the decision maker is fair. This is solely the function of the person exercising the discretion. What the courts are concerned with is the decision-making process and the manner in which the discretion was exercised and whether it was exercised fairly. In Abdul Salim Yassin and Noel Thomas against the Attorney General, Justice Bernard dealt with how to approach a stay of execution until the hearing and determination of constitutional proceedings in death penalty cases. Citing with approval Lord Brown Wilkinson in Thomas Reckley against Minister of Public Safety, will clutch at any glimmer of hope while there is still life. Unquote. In Marin against the Attorney General, CCJ decision, Appeal CV5 of 2010, Justice Bernard considered a new area of law. It's a case arising out of Belize. The Attorney General sought to recover damages for loss suffered due to alleged abuse of power by the appellants who were former ministers of government, and which it is claimed constitute misfeasance in public office. The loss involved the sale of national lands at an undervalue from which the appellants allegedly obtained financial benefits. On the issue of whether the state could sue a public officer for misfeasance in public office at common law or for the tort of misfeasance, in making the distinction, Her Honor delved into a comprehensive history of both and commented as follows, and I'll be very brief. There has emerged no case in any Commonwealth jurisdiction where governments or states have sought to utilize the tort against public officials abusing powers conferred on them for their own financial gain. We find ourselves in virgin territory in deciding the discrete point which has arisen in this appeal. The objective is to make a public officer personally liable for misuse and abuse of power intended to be used for the public good, but which was used for his own benefit. Admittedly, the criminal offense of misfeasance in public office has always been available to the state and may have been the preferred option for punishing corrupt officials, hence the total absence of any precedents where the tort was used. Of course, if the objective is to recover economic loss due to the public officer's abuse of his power, the tort of misfeasance would be the appropriate remedy. Then, of course, we have the case of Ramdas and Jairam. Here, the CCJ inviting a full bench. I think it's possibly the first time that the full bench of the CCJ came out to hear an appeal concerning whether equitable interest exists in land law in Guyana. And the CCJ, in a judgment, unanimous judgment rendered by Justice Bernard after going through over 100 years of authorities that were conflicting. One line of authorities established that the courts recognized equitable interest in land, and another line of authorities suggests that the court would not recognize equitable interest. And then you had a third line of authorities where the courts used equitable doctrines and concepts such as constructive trust and resulting trust to confer an interest in a transport property. Hakan Rahiman is one of those cases where they looked at the contribution of the wife and for one moment may have forgotten that equitable interest doesn't ground an interest in land because the wife ending up getting half of the property. But there were three lines of cases that the court had to analyze, and Justice Bernard was shouldered with the responsibility of rendering the unanimous decision of the court, and she did so with distinction. Shanique Myrie is another case out of Barbados, well, out of Jamaica, where the court, sitting in its original jurisdiction, had to consider the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. Again, Justice Bernard delivered one of the many judgments delivered by the court. In the case of Romeo da Costa Hall against the Queen, 2011, CCJ 6, Justice Bernard considered the important issue of sentencing guidelines and how to approach sentencing and how to weigh the different factors before a proper sentence can be imposed. Apart from her notable judgments, Justice Bernard was a champion of women and children's rights. This passion led her to establish organizations focused on improving the status of women in Guyana and the Caribbean. Justice Bernard's advocacy in seeking equal rights for women and reform in children's law also saw her being appointed to serve on national, regional, and international bodies. In 1972, Justice Bernard founded the Conference on the Affairs and Status of Women in Guyana. She also served as the founding secretary of the Caribbean Women's Association from 1970 to 1974, and was a member and chair of the Caribbean Steering Committee for Women's Affairs, later established as the Women and Development Unit of UWI. In 1981, the government of Guyana appointed Justice Bernard as the chairperson of a committee established to examine the laws of Guyana and make recommendations for the implementation of the provisions of Article 29 and 30 of the Constitution of Guyana, which provides for equality of men and women. The committee was also charged with making recommendations to reform the laws on children. Through Justice Bernard's stewardship, this committee produced key pieces of legislation. For instance, the Children Born Out of Wedlock Removal of Discrimination Act 1983. This led to amendment of the Evidence Act, the Civil Law Act, the Infancy Act, Legitimacy Act, and the Maintenance Act to remove the distinction in the various provisions between children born in and out of wedlock. Consequently, the act was repealed. The act repealed the Bastardy Act. Further, because of the recommendations of that committee, three important legislation were enacted in 1990. The Married Person Property Amendment Act, the Family Dependent Provisions Act, and the Equal Rights Act. Because of her expertise and leadership on human rights, Justice Bernard in 1982 was elected a member of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. This body comprised 23 independent experts that monitors implementation of the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. From 1982 to 1984, she served as the rapporteur for the committee, and then from 1985 to 1989, she was its chairperson. Justice Bernard also chaired a judicial colloquium in Guyana, hosted by the Commonwealth Secretariat in collaboration with CARICOM Secretariat. The purpose of the colloquium was to increase sensitivity and awareness of gender discrimination when encountered by the judiciary of Caribbean states and strengthen the use of international human rights norms and instruments. In later years, she continued to serve, and in 2014, Justice Bernard was a founding member and the first patron of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges, which was formed in 2014. Justice Bernard is the recipient of national awards and a whole host of awards from the University of Guyana, honorary doctorate from the University of the West Indies, etc. Justice Bernard also has published widely, and I have a list of publications here which I will leave it for the record of the court but will not read it out. As a woman of many firsts, Justice Bernard lived her life in such a way that she ensured that she would not be the last. No one can deny that Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard has left a lasting legacy for future generations of lawyers, especially women, to emulate. She came from humble beginnings and through hard work shattered the glass ceilings and paved the way for other women to participate in an arena that was male-dominated. The extraordinary outpouring of condolences from all over the world confirms that Guyana has truly lost one of its most brilliant minds and distinguished daughters. To her daughter, Caroline, and other relatives and friends, I express the condolences of the law officers of the state, members of the bar, and of course, the government of Guyana on Justice Bernard's passing. Thank you very much, Your Honors.
Ms. Prosecution.
Honorable President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, Attorney General of Guyana, Chief Justice of Guyana, Justices of Appeal of Guyana and Trinidad, Judges of the High Court of Guyana and Trinidad, the Ombudsman, the Solicitor General, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, retired judges, members of the inner and the outer bars, commissioners of title, chief magistrate, magistrates, president and members of the Bar Association, president of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, the daughter of Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, ORCCH, Caroline, my classmate from UG all the way to Hewardin, and relatives of Justice Desiree Bernard. Today, we are all gathered here to reflect on the life and work of an outstanding daughter of this dear land of Guyana, who achieved many firsts, especially in the judiciary of Guyana, as the first female puisne judge, first female justice of appeal, first female chief justice of Guyana and the Commonwealth Caribbean, first female chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana and the Commonwealth Caribbean, and the first female judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. As Director of Public Prosecutions for Guyana, I will focus on Justice Bernard's contributions in the criminal justice system and my personal interactions with her since my admission to the bar in Guyana. It's my distinct pleasure to do this tribute for Justice Bernard, especially because I was the state counsel who prosecuted before her in the Demerara Assizes when she sat for the last time in the criminal assizes before she was elevated to Justice of Appeal in 1992. Appearing before Justice Bernard was a most pleasant experience for me as a state counsel. The difference of this judge is that she was gentle yet firm. She exuded a calmness and had a pleasant personality. She made her points and she spoke out against the crime that was happening in the society. I distinctly remember presenting a cause in death by dangerous driving case before her, where the accused was overtaking a vehicle while it was overtaking another vehicle. The accused had pleaded guilty, and while sentencing the accused, Justice Bernard lamented on the dangerous nature with which people were driving with no regard for human life, which resulted in so many fatal accidents on the roadways, an issue which still continues to pervade our society. Justice Bernard was of the view that the sentence must reflect the seriousness of the case and send a message to offenders. I recall her saying in the murder case, people have no regard for life of others. They're so quick to resort to violence, resulting in death. People no longer value life, and she would look right and she would look left in that courtroom in which she sat on the western wing of the High Court, the Victoria Law Courts. She was appalled and concerned with the haste with which persons resort to violence. I commend her concern at what's happening in the society and for the court to take a stand in deterring potential offenders, while at the same time considering the rehabilitation and reintegration of the offender into society. As a young lawyer, I was struck by Justice Bernard's genuine concern for human life and for the decline in humanity in our society. To Justice Bernard, a case was not just another case, but she attached the human significance and importance which it deserved. This character of hers would have undoubtedly contributed to her being awarded the two highest orders of Guyana, of the Cassie Crown of Honor and the Order of Roraima, a doctorate of laws from the University of the West Indies, as well as an honorary doctor of letters by the University of Guyana. While appearing before Justice Bernard in the Court of Appeal in the Eastern Wing, this is the Western Wing, in many criminal appeals, Justice Bernard was always fair to both sides, thus ensuring Article 144(1) of the Constitution in that the case was afforded a fair hearing by an independent and impartial court. I recall in the case of Sheldon Adams in the state for the offense of murder, despite allowing the appeal due to the errors in law made by the trial judge, Justice Bernard was amenable to the state's argument for a retrial, which Her Honor ordered. Justice Bernard was undaunted and could not be intimidated. Justice Bernard sat in the habeas corpus application in the famous extradition case of Guido Hans Metzger, which was a request from the Commonwealth country of Canada and dealt with Section 8(3) of the Fugitive Offenders Act. The other extradition cases of King against Director of Prisons and Barry Dataram also dealt with the same section, which has since been amended by the then Attorney General, Mr. Charles Rishiram Ramson. SC. In this case, Justice Bernard, since 1990, was also concerned with the issue of the trial of a case for more than 10 years after the incident and the impact on the defense. And this issue was later dealt with by the Caribbean Court of Justice in the case of Vishnu Brijlal and Hardat Haripishad in 2017, with the president being the then Sir Dennis Byron and Justice Saunders sitting as one of the other judges, 27 years after. Justice Bernard was always concerned about the rights of people, and in particular women, and would participate in conferences to propagate and promote the rights of women and vulnerable persons. As Chancellor of the Judiciary, Justice Bernard hosted a magistrates conference at the Tower Hotel in 2003 on the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act. Justice Bernard continued to appear in criminal cases at the Caribbean Court of Justice while sitting there, including the case of Vaughan Thomas against the state from Guyana. Justice Bernard was knowledgeable in the scriptures and held a high position at the St. George's Cathedral, which I dare say contributed to her good character and the high standard of this noble profession, which she maintained throughout her life. This was reflected in the practice direction by Justice Bernard, dated the 12th of November 2001, dealing with the mode of dress for attorneys at law, which I dare say our dear Chancellor holds dear to her heart. Justice Bernard has left us a rich legacy. On my behalf and on that of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, I express heartfelt condolences to her dear daughter, Caroline, and other relatives. May her dear soul rest in peace, and may her legacy live on throughout the work of the lawyers at the bar and the judges sitting in all courts. Thank you.
Solana Lal, President of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers.
Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Honorable Madam Justice Yonet Cummings Edwards, Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana. Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandalal, Senior Counsel and Minister of Legal Affairs. Honorable Chief Justice, Honorable Judges of the Court of Appeal of Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, Honorable Judges of the High Court of Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, members of the Inner and Outer Bar, daughter of the late Justice Bernard, Carol Ann Bernard, family and friends, good afternoon. May it please Your Honors, please permit me to adopt the protocols established by the Honorable Attorney General if I have failed to do so properly. The Guyana Association of Women Lawyers is honored to be afforded the opportunity to make remarks at this special sitting of the Court of Appeal in honor of Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, OR CCH. Hailed as a lady of firsts and often described as a trailblazer by the Honorable Attorney General earlier, and as a pioneering jurist by the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Bernard was well known for her appointments to the judicial bench of the High Court, the Court of Appeal of Guyana, being the first woman High Court judge, Justice of Appeal, Chief Justice, Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, and on her retirement, the first woman judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Justice Bernard was the first female president of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations, OCBA, a member of the Commonwealth Magistrates and Judges Association, the International Association of Women Judges, the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers, and the first patron of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges. Justice Bernard was truly a beacon of legal excellence. She was an amazing daughter of the soil and was awarded national honors of the Cassie Crown of Honor and Order of Roraima, among many other accolades, including honorary doctorates from the University of the West Indies and the University of Guyana. On an international stage, Justice Bernard served as a member and then the chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and vice president of the International Federation of Women Lawyers. Justice Bernard indeed shattered the proverbial glass ceiling and opened doors for many of us female lawyers to follow in several areas of the legal arena. In April 1987, 8 female legal practitioners at the Guyana Bar gathered briefly in a courtroom. Among the group was Madam Justice Desiree Bernard, together with Josephine Whitehead, now senior counsel, Carol James Boston, senior counsel, Hazel Dawn, and the late Deborah Baca, Sheila Chapman, Elvie Edwards, and Pearline Roach. The result of this meeting was the formation of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, with Justice Bernard as the founder member and president. Women supporting justice and equality. That became the motto of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, which truly reflected the goals of this phenomenal woman. Theirs was the view that female attorneys should work together to address legal issues of particular importance to women and children, since the group could accomplish much more for these vulnerable litigants collectively. In February 1993, the Georgetown Legal Aid Clinic, now the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, was established. The founders included Justice Bernard, Josephine Whitehead, Senior Counsel, Ralph Ramkaran, Senior Counsel, the late Ashton Chase, Senior Counsel, Miles Fitzpatrick, Senior Counsel, and Baini Ramkaran. Justice Bernard served as the chair of the Legal Aid Clinic until she became Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana in May 2001. Ms. Josephine Whitehead, Senior Counsel, a friend and co-founding member of the GAWL and the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic, had these words to say about the late Justice Bernard. She guided the clinic through its early years with the same wisdom, composure, and commitment to the rule of law that she always exhibited on the various benches that she served. She never stood on ceremony or paraded her achievements. It was always a pleasure to work with her. Over the years, the GAWL, through the mentorship of Justice Bernard, has fought for women's rights and equality through the introduction of gender-sensitive legislation, facilitation of legal workshops and outreaches, distribution of brochures on legal rights issues, and has supported the work of the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic and other stakeholders. One of the most seminal works of the association, and a credit to the Honorable Justice Bernard and other past presidents, is the Law New booklet. Justice Bernard's leadership and vision has inspired us to continue the work of the association. In recent years, Justice Bernard continued to pay a keen interest in the association even after she acceded to the bench at the CCJ and attended functions of the association whenever she was in Guyana. In her message to the association on its 25th anniversary, and as a testament to her dedication to empowering women in the law, she stated, "Long and dedicated service is my sincere wish for the future as the association's torch continues to burn brighter and it is passed on to future members, hopefully imbued with the same commitment and unswerving zeal in ensuring the preservation and development of the rights of women in our society." We hope to always strive for long and dedicated service as we continue to carry the torch so ably lit by our founding member, first president, honorary member of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, Madam Justice Bernard. The Guyana Association of Women Lawyers honors her many years of service, her significant contribution to the improvement of women's rights, and her contribution to the jurisprudence and administration of justice in Guyana and the wider Caribbean. Justice Bernard has transformed the lives of many through her groundbreaking decisions, her insightful contributions, leadership, and mentorship. By this, her legacy resonates far beyond the courtroom, serving as a testament of her lasting impact on our lives and our society. The Guyana Association of Women Lawyers extends deepest condolences to the daughter, the family, colleagues, and all who knew and admired her. Thank you.
We'll now have Mr. Ronald Birch Smith, President of the Bar Association of Guyana.
Honorable President, Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders, Chancellor of the Court of Appeal of Guyana, please permit me to adopt the order of precedence capably established by those who came before me. I'm quite sure I can't do it correctly anyway. On behalf of the Guyana Bar Association, I wish to thank the court for the opportunity to address this special sitting held in honor of Madam Justice Desiree Bernard, whose mortal soul departed this earthly abode recently. As in the recent months, we do not delight in occasions such as this, where they provide an opportunity to record for posterity the highlights of a superlative judicial career. As the authors have referred, Madam Justice Bernard was a student of the Bishop's High School. She completed her law degree from the University of London in 1963 and began private practice as a solicitor in 1964. I recall her journey to qualification being richly described by the late Mr. Stanley Moore, Senior Counsel, at the special sitting held in honor of Justice Bernard's retirement in 2014, where he described the long and arduous studies in that period. As I reflect on it, I recognize it was a challenging time in British Guyana, with the social, economic, and political travails of that late pre-independence period, and no doubt a difficult time at which one could come of age and begin a legal career. Justice Bernard practiced as a solicitor until the profession was fused in Guyana in 1980. The reports, the West Indian reports and Guyana law reports, are filled with references to her cases as a solicitor. I have no doubt that the leading barristers with whom she was engaged were always delighted to benefit from her legal competence, clarity of writing, and undoubted efficiency as a solicitor. Around that time, Justice Bernard was invited by Chancellor Crane to become a judge of the High Court of Guyana. Again, 1980, this period was one of great tumult, and joining what was then an all-male judiciary must have been a daunting prospect for her. In the best of times, being a judge requires great courage, independence, and always an almost vicious indifference to public criticism. As a trailblazer, Justice Bernard required this in buckets. A good example of this would have been her judgment in cases involving the government of President Janet Jagan, referred to by the Honorable Attorney General earlier. Others have referred to the leading judgments written by Madam Justice Bernard, and I'm sure others will be described. They cover the full spectrum of legal issues, and many of them, both reported and unreported, continue to be cited by us daily in Guyana and in other courts with similar jurisprudence. They are remarkable indeed for the ease with which one can read them. You can easily understand the issues amongst the parties, the survey of relevant cases and statutes, and her path to the correct outcome. I can visualize the litigants themselves being able to read them and understand the reasons of the court without being lost in excessive legalese. I dare say the hallmark of good judicial writing. When she became the first Chief Justice, Justice of the Court of Appeal in the Commonwealth Caribbean, first Chancellor of Guyana to be a woman, first woman judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Bernard's impressive body of work made her selection an easy decision on its merits, not affirmative action. It was remarkable that with such a stellar legal career, she led with humility. Her outstanding work ensured that questions of gender were irrelevant to her appointment. As has been said of many other trailblazers, Justice Bernard kicked down the doors so effectively that those who follow were unable to recognize that there was ever a door there in the first place. Her work will live on, and many others will reflect on her legal scholarship. I think the equally remarkable aspect of her career was the time she made for other non-judicial or non-legal causes. Her work on the repeal of the Bastardy Act and amendments to and the introduction of important family legislation described by the Attorney General stand out. Her work on the elimination of discrimination against women and other members of the community also stand out. She was a leader of progressive causes. One wonders, today, what would be those contemporary causes where discrimination remains that Justice Bernard would find it acceptable to work on their reform. The organization she founded or led is not a short list. The Caribbean Women's Association, OCWA, the Georgetown Legal Aid Clinic, the Toastmasters Club, Consumers Association, the Girl Guide. She was a founder and patron of the Association of Women's Lawyers, an exceptional group that does real work and provides real service. And it does so without much fanfare, perhaps reflective of the temperament of its founders, including Justice Bernard. That I am so far ineligible for membership remains an enduring disappointment. Of personal significance to me was that Justice Bernard was also a woman of great faith, a fellow parishioner of Christchurch Anglican Church for many years. While she was Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, she also served as Chancellor of the Anglican Diocese, providing legal counsel to the bishop, trustees, and members of the council. She led the revision to the diocesan regulations in the year 2000. And since I'm also the registrar of the diocese, permit me today to note on behalf of the Bishop, Davidson, and other members of the Anglican Diocese our gratitude for her service. I thank the court for the opportunity to address you here today, and I offer on behalf of the bar condolences to her relatives and loved ones, and our thanks for her long and exceptional service. Thank you.
I'll now invite Justice Carl Singh, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary.
Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Your Honor, the Chancellor, Honorable Attorney General, Mr. Nandalal, Senior Counsel. Your Honor, the Chief Justice, judges of the Court of Appeal of Guyana, and Justice Pemberton of the Court of Appeal of Trinidad and Tobago, judges of the High Court of Guyana, and Her Honor, Justice Kangaloo of the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago, Distinguished Director of Public Prosecutions, Commissioners of Title, members of the Magistracy, Sir Dennis Byron, retired judges of the Court of Appeal, Justices Claudette Singh and Justice Perry, retired judges of the High Court, senior counsel, colleagues of the legal profession, relatives and friends of the late Justice Bernard. I crave the indulgence of the court to first address President Saunders of the Caribbean Court of Justice and Justices Pemberton and Kangaloo, and former President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Sir Dennis Byron. You have all been very kind, noble, and considerate in your decision to join us in these proceedings. And while I do not pretend to be speaking on behalf of the members of the legal profession, I think the membership of that collective would have no hesitation in joining me in thanking you for doing so. I am grateful to Her Honor the Chancellor for her kind invitation to me to speak on this occasion. Her Honor's invitation gave me the clear direction that I was afforded 7 minutes to speak. In times not so long past, I very firmly insisted that orders, directions, and instructions must be obeyed. Your Honors are assured of my earnest endeavor in full compliance. Justice Bernard played an instrumental role in my early years on the bench. She offered me valuable words of advice and guidance, and was always willing and ready to listen to and discuss troubling issues in my first cases. And I admit that there were many such troubling issues in the early days. Justice Bernard played an almost maternal role in my formative years on the bench. And for that, I will always be grateful. When Justice Kennard, former Chief Justice, was elevated to the office of Chancellor, Justice Bernard succeeded him in the office of Chief Justice. Chancellor Kennard, after waning hours of expectation, retired from judicial service. Not much is known of Chancellor Kennard's service in the judiciary, apart from his judgments, but I tell you that there is much to be told. On the eventual retirement of Chancellor Kennard, Chief Justice Bernard was appointed Chancellor of the Judiciary, and I as Chief Justice. We had an exceedingly good working relationship, and there was never a moment of disagreement between us. If Chancellor Bernard found it necessary to make an intervention with me on any matter relating to the business of the High Court, it was always done in a dignified, polite, and courteous manner. President Saunders was so very right when, at a special sitting of the Caribbean Court of Justice, convened to pay tribute to Justice Bernard. His Honor noted that one of Justice Bernard's significant attributes was her self-effacing humility, and that she carried herself with dignity, with pride, with quiet confidence, but without airs or arrogance or affectations, I beg your pardon, of any kind. This was indeed so. And it was because of her dignity and pride in her professional reputation that one would have never heard that Justice Bernard was involved in idle gossip, or that she was known to malign the character and reputation of her colleagues, or anyone for that matter. Since her passing, the media has inundated us on the many professional firsts of this distinguished Guyanese jurist. Those firsts are well known, and I propose not to utilize my allotted time to enumerate them, not because I consider those professional firsts insignificant. By any measure, they are indeed remarkable. But I believe that there are other matters touching the life and work of Desiree Patricia Bernard, which I feel compelled to mention. And as an aside, recalling the name Patricia, I have only heard the late senior counsel Clarence Hughes in private address Justice Bernard as Patricia. In her presentation at the 15th Commonwealth Law Conference held in Nairobi, Kenya, Justice Bernard demonstrated her recognition of the importance of fundamental rights and freedoms. An extract of her Honor's presentation at that conference aptly demonstrates that recognition. Her Honor noted, quote, "Equal responsibility for the development of a culture of respect for fundamental rights and freedoms rests on members of the legal profession, who must be prepared to be the guardians and watchdogs of violations and breaches of the rights of the citizenry of a state. The profession must not allow such violations to go unredressed, even if it requires undertaking pro bono representation. The legal profession owes it to its citizens to ensure respect for rights guaranteed to them under the Constitution, and it should spare no quarter in the quest to uphold and preserve these rights." End of quote. I refer to Justice Saunders again, who, speaking at that special sitting of the Caribbean Court of Justice I referred to earlier, noted, quote, that one of Desiree's enduring qualities was the way she looked out for others, particularly women, the powerless, and those in need of the protection of the law. End of quote. On women, in her book, Reflections and Opinions, in the chapter titled Forever Indebted to Women, The Power Behind the Throne, Justice Bernard referred to verse 22 of the book of Genesis in the Holy Bible, which reads thus: "And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he woman, and brought her unto the man." Justice Bernard noted that there was a significant body of male opinion that entertains the view that this verse in the Bible justified the secondary role women must play to men. Justice Bernard would have none of that. Paying tribute to women on one occasion, Justice Bernard remarked, quote, "Never underestimate the power of a woman, which epitomizes the strengths of women in any undertaking in which they are involved." End of quote. And Her Honor has urged that it is time women call in the debts and promissory notes owed to them by men and demand a halt to the escalating rise in violent behavior. It is time, Her Honor said, that particularly young teenage women take a stand and wake up to the realization that they have options in a world which is on the fast track of change. In addition to being the powers behind the thrones on which men sit, The awareness must be conveyed to women that they can sit on the throne themselves. They can be whatever they want to be. Some years ago, when the Caribbean Court of Justice sat here in Guyana, there was a special sitting of that court to recognize Justice Bernard, who I believe had demitted office or was about to demit office as a judge of that court. I was honored to have been asked by Sir Dennis Byron, then the president of that court, to speak on that occasion. In recognizing the professional achievements of Justice Bernard, I reflected on the historical social attitude, at least in the United Kingdom, to women being appointed to judicial office. I referred then to a quote from an English text where it was written that convicts, lepers, and women were not suitable for such appointments. Well, as has been said, Justice Bernard shattered the glass ceiling. And when one looks at the leadership of the judiciary in Guyana, one must inevitably conclude that the glass ceiling has been well and truly shattered. Justice Bernard has written and spoken extensively on a range of legal issues from which the legal profession will undoubtedly benefit for years to come. Death, by its larcenous nature, robs us of relatives, friends, and colleagues, and leaves us only with cherished memories of them. Desiree Patricia Bernard will be fondly remembered. She was a judge, learned and fair. She was a good Christian woman, possessed of extraordinary human values. On the occasion of her first sitting as a judge of the High Court, Justice Bernard, in concluding remarks at that sitting, said, quote, "I pledge publicly that I shall hold the scales of justice evenly and be patient with the poor and unlearned who may appear before me. I know that I can count on the cooperation of all practitioners, male and female, and with God's help, I shall succeed." Her Honor never deviated from her public pledge made in 1980. Succeed she did. Indeed, she excelled. On behalf of my family and on my own behalf, I offer our sincere condolences to Caroline, to relatives and friends of Justice Bernard, and to anyone whose life was touched by this exceptional lady. May God grant her soul eternal peace. Thank you, Your Honor.
I will now invite Sir Dennis Byron, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Your Honor, President Saunders, Your Honorable Madam Chancellor, Your Honor, Chief Justice. I crave your indulgence in the interest of time to adopt the protocol list, which was so ably and eloquently presented by the Honorable Attorney General, and has already been repeated several times. I hope I can assume your permission. Thank you. The passing of the late Desiree Bernard has caused much reflections. And I start off with reflecting with the assistance of my dear wife, who is here with me, on the many lives that she touched, and to whom I begin by expressing my condolences. I think, first of all, of her much-loved daughter, Caroline, her extended family, the people whom she mentored and assisted, the staff and co-workers in the many institutions that she served and led in Guyana, in Trinidad, and the Caribbean Court of Justice, in Bermuda, as a court of the Judge of Appeal, the legal profession, not only in Guyana, but throughout the Caribbean, the Anglican Diocese of Guyana and its congregations, of which she was the Chancellor, the United Nations, the Inter-American Development Bank, and her many loved ones. I express my condolences. But I must emphasize that this is not an occasion for sadness, because she lived an extraordinary life, and the memories of her accomplishments are inspirational and evoke pride in her admirers. Justice Bernard was a testament to the high quality of Caribbean intellectualism, integrity, and work ethic. Her life brought credit to her family, to her native country of Guyana, as well as the wider Caribbean. And I salute her as one of the most outstanding people I have had the honor to know. I was fortunate enough to have witnessed several stages of her journey. I first met her through our membership and participation in the organization of the Commonwealth Bar Associations during the early stages of its existence, when we were both young practitioners, she representing the Bar of Guyana and I representing the Bar of St. Kitts Nevis. She made important interventions at meetings, and it was not long before she inevitably became the president of ACPA. After making her mark in private practice, Justice Bernard entered the Judicial Service of Guyana. Her excellence as a jurist, her integrity, her work ethic, and leadership qualities propelled her meteoric rise to become the first female chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana. Again, I was able to work with her because when she was Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, I was the Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. And we were part of an era of innovative and productive regional judicial cooperation, highlighted by annual retreats of the Caribbean heads of judiciary, which focused on the exchange of knowledge and ideas for the development of our respective judiciaries. Then she was selected as one of the inaugural judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And then I joined the court and had the opportunity to work closely with her. Her scholarship, her integrity, the record of her judgments, and a broad collection of legal lectures and essays tell their own story, marking her as one of the leading jurists of our time. I had the honor to write the preface to her book on essays, and I will only say that reading those essays was an enthralling experience. She was an exceptional colleague, hardworking, brilliant, and contributing to the development of Caribbean jurisprudence by the judgments she authored and by her critical analysis and insightful and thoughtful input during deliberations in those that she did not author. Justice Bernard's legacy extends far beyond her professional achievements. She was a compassionate and generous soul, always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need, mentoring young lawyers, advocating the rights of the marginalized, and supporting a wide variety of charitable causes. The Caribbean has lost one of its greatest stalwarts. Let us remember her with gratitude for the profound impact she has had on our lives and on our region. I'm confident that the legacy will live on in the contributions she made to the development of our jurisprudence, the timeless ideas she has expressed, and the countless lives she touched, and the people she has inspired. Let us honor her memory by continuing the work she began, advocating for justice, equality, and human dignity for all. May I please?
I will now invite Professor Kenneth Benjamin, retired Chief Justice of Belize.
Honorable Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Madam Janet Cummings Edwards, Chancellor of Judiciary. Honorable Roxanne George, Chief Justice of Guyana. And I'd like to recognize the Justices of Appeal from Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the judges from Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago. And with your Honor's permission, can I adopt the excellent protocol list from the Honorable Attorney General while acknowledging his presence? Now, this is going to be a very personal journey in relation to my knowledge of Madam Justice Desiree Bernard.
And I wish to point out that she is very particular in putting the accents on her name, Desiree, when she wrote it. Now, the honor and privilege is mine to be allowed to pay tribute to my mentor, Madam Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, a lady, a scholar, and a guiding light to many. I'm proud to declare in this forum, quite unabashedly, that I am a protege of Justice Bernard, recognizing that I am one of many, and I see another one across the room in my friend and colleague, retired Justice Carl Singh. Indeed, she has often announced that my humble self and Justice Singh are her proteges, and she's done so on more than one occasion. My close encounter with Madam Justice Bernard began in November of 1977 at Bail Court. And I see two persons who would have been present on that occasion, Mr. Harry Narayan Ramkaran and Miss Josephine Whitehead. At that time, I was a newly minted solicitor from out of the Hugh Wooding Law School, and recently admitted to a then bifurcated legal profession. My timidity must have been apparent, as being the most junior associate and lawyer present, fetching a stack of files for cases to be heard from the long list of the not unusual Monday morning sitting of Bail Court. Madam Justice Bernard beckoned to me and insisted that I sit in the jury box beside her. From thence began my schooling in court etiquette and in the finer points of legal practice. I was introduced to the grande dame of the legal profession, Justice Bernard being the undisputable prima inter pares. And I speak of Sheila Chapman, L.V. Overton Edwards, and Pauline Roach, all of blessed memory. Collectively, they sheltered me and gratuitously gave of their knowledge and experience. For nearly a year, I was often left to the last person in bail court, applying for decree absolutes for everyone else who had already left. From my observation, there flowed from the bench a deep respect towards the then Miss Bernard, and for me, that was extraordinary and applauded to her. Miss Bernard was always stylishly attired with the correct amount of conservatism, but not lacking in matching accessories. Skillfully, she negotiated accommodations with fellow practitioners, and from that I learned to maintain cordial relations with fellow practitioners. During the 3 years I spent at Clark and Martin Legal Practitioners, I detected at least a few gestures by Miss Bernard at being a matchmaker. But Your Honors, that is a conversation for another forum other than this august body. In September 1980, Miss Bernard requested that I visit her offices in the First Federation building. Upon attending, Miss Bernard gave me a history of her practice, explaining that she had inherited it from Mr. Vibert Lampkin, who had in turn taken over the practice of the late Sir John Carter, Queen's Counsel, barrister and diplomat par excellence. She then informed me that she had accepted an invitation to ascend the High Court bench in October of that year, and that she would like me to take over her office, staff, and clientele. It took me a short while to accept the offer. Thereafter, I was privileged to sit at the bar when the Honorable Madam Justice Desiree Bernard was elevated to the Supreme Court of Judicature of Guyana as the first female judge. Your Honors, the practice I inherited was a well-oiled machine that catered to a large extent to the needs of women from all walks of life. It was a learning experience for me to grapple with the demands of a matrimonial law practice. In addition, Justice Bernard was the much sought-after solicitor by leading barristers And so I inherited a lot of cases that were being handled by very prominent barristers at the time. It was not unheard of for a divorce matter to be completed in 3 months. Such was the well-oiled machine. In about 1983, Justice Bernard became aware that I was betrothed to my recently passed wife. Little did I know that Miss Bernard was a close friend of my wife's aunt, and together they conspired. And that led to a summons to Justice Bernard's chambers at Court 3 in the Supreme Court building. It was then announced to me as to what would be the location of my matrimonial home. And arrangements were put in place for me to complete the purchase. It was at that point that my status evolved from that of being a protege to being a family acquaintance of Justice Bernard's household. So much so that Justice Bernard and her dear mother, formerly called Granny Bernard, from time to time acted as a babysitter to my daughter. Your Honors, Justice Bernard has always been a beacon of integrity, scholarship, and progressive thinking, all wrapped up in a self-effacing, even-tempered disposition. Such was my respect for Justice Bernard that at every stage of my judicial career, I sought her wise counsel before embarking upon a new chapter. In this regard, I often visited the CCJ, and I suspect that Justice Saunders would have wanted to know why I was there. When Justice Bernard called, it was in the nature of a polite command. And such was the case when that erstwhile committee was assembled to eliminate discrimination and promote equality for women and children in the laws of Guyana. I was privileged to have sat on that committee with Justice Bernard. Justice Bernard was not one to eschew the enjoyment of life, and I can still picture her dancing at the inaugural ball for the Honorable Justice Saunders' accession to the presidency of the Caribbean Court of Justice. I was very honored to have hosted her for the biannual conference of the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers in October, November of 2019. Now, permit me to deal with a singular trait of Justice Bernard. Sitting in the High Court, and I suspect it was mentioned yesterday by my colleague, Mr. Hughes, and that is the legendary fan that Justice Bernard had. I was on the receiving end, like many others, of the effects of that fan, which was extracted from the handbag that accompanied her on the bench. Your Honors, the lifting of the fan served as a warning that your arguments or cross-examination was bordering on the irrelevant or the pedantic. The speed of the fanning served as further reminders as to how far off the point you'd strayed. But the pièce de résistance was vigorous fanning coupled with her Honor ceasing to write and her face steadfastly pointed to the west towards the Avenue of the Republic. Your Honors, our lives have been made enriched by the presence of Desiree Patricia Bernard on this earth. She shall surely be missed. We take comfort in the tremendous legacy she has left on the firmament. On behalf of the students, lecturers, and staff of the Law Department of the University of Guyana, and on behalf of my children and I publicly offer deepest condolences to Caroline and to the extended family of my beloved mentor. May she rest in eternal peace. I pray the indulgence of your honors.
I will now invite Mr. Hari Narayan Ramkaran, Senior Counsel.
May it please your honors. Your Honor, the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Your Honor, the Chancellor, Your Honor, the Chief Justice, all other protocols respectfully observed. I should like to thank Your Honor, the Chancellor, for inviting me to deliver remarks in tribute at this special sitting of the full bench to the memory of the late Justice Bernard. Justice Bernard would have been thrilled to have had the opportunity to preside over a sitting of the Court of Appeal in this new courtroom, the ceremonial opening of which occurred only a few days ago. With an expanded Court of Appeal, it will allow the courts to be sitting, two courts to be sitting at the same time. As we pay tribute to the memory of the late Justice Bernard, we cannot help but reflect on the fact that her work as a Justice of Appeal and as Chancellor, the records of which are contained in this building, will resonate in these new walls and provide additional inspiration to those who come here to argue for justice and to those who are charged with the responsibility of delivering justice. Guyana has produced many great women, but it is our profession that provided the foundation from which one of the greatest launched an extensive and distinguished career as a Caribbean woman that hardly anyone can surpass. As His Honor Justice Adrian Saunders said, it is well nigh impossible that the region will ever produce another trailblazer as Justice Bernard was. By her accomplishments and contributions, she left Guyana a far better place than when she entered it. We should feel uplifted, and our nation should feel proud that she dwelt amongst us. Justice Bernard began her career as a solicitor in 1964. No one is around who can tell us firsthand what inspired her to pursue law as a career. Merely to conceive of such an idea at that time suggested unusual boldness and courage. That boldness saw her seeking a place at Cameron and Shepherd, which she did successfully. She fondly remembered the time she spent there. At that time, Fred Wills was conducting classes for students for the LLB degree. One fellow student with whom Justice Bernard remained lifelong friends and who was her neighbor for many years in Bel Air Park was the late Ayub Makdoum, also a solicitor, who regrettably passed in 1992. In fact, it was difficult to know Desiree Bernard and not be a friend. She was a warm and generous person. When she was offered and accepted a judgeship in 1980, those of us with matters in chamber court, me with my bundle of files from Cameron and Shepherd, and Kenneth Benjamin with his bundle from Clark and Martin, when we gathered to gossip, sometimes about judges or absent colleagues, at which gathering Justice Bernard was always present, enjoyed, but never participated in, as she didn't gossip. We all felt disappointed by the impending loss to the practicing bar. Little did we know that this courageous woman would do us all proud. It was not long before she had to deploy that courage when confronted with challenges of being a judge. 2 cases came before her. Desmond Hoyt against the Catholic Standard and Andrew Morrison, 2 instances of libel by the Catholic Standard. She found in favor of the plaintiff in 1 case and awarded $4,000 in damages and dismissed the other. In the appeal, she was reversed in both cases. Substantially higher damages were awarded in the case in which she found for the plaintiff, and she was reversed and unusually high damages were ordered in the case that she had dismissed. That was a mark of great courage at the time for those who are younger than I am and were not aware of what transpired during that period. She later complained bitterly on the bench that the Court of Appeal did not publish written decisions in the cases as was required by the rules. There were other cases of note. In 1997, the election of Mrs. Jagan was subject to court proceedings. She dismissed the application. In 2001, so was the election of Mr. Bharat Jagdeo earlier in the year. She dismissed those proceedings as well. Her adherence to legal principles in the Hoyt and Catholic Standard cases, and those just mentioned, had already underlined her approach to decision-making. When the time came for her to be appointed Chancellor in 2001, there was no contest. In all of the positions held by Justice Bernard, High Court Judge, Justice of Appeal, Chief Justice, Chancellor, Judge of the CCJ, Justice Bernard was the first woman to hold them. Your Honors, the scale of Justice Desiree Bernard's work and contributions are staggering. In addition to the legal offices outlined above, she was president of OCBA, as you just heard, was a founding member of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers, as you heard, Chancellor of Anglican Diocese of Guyana, as you heard, Chair of the Georgetown Legal Aid, on which I had the honor to serve, as you heard. She was instrumental in wide-ranging legal reform regarding women's rights and issues in Guyana and has written extensively on women's issues, as you have also heard. She was a member of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and later rapporteur and chair of that committee. Justice Bernard was a member of the International Association of Women's Judges and vice president of the International Association of Women Lawyers, a justice of the Court of Appeal in Bermuda, and many other positions. These positions and others which have held indicate the spread and depth of Justice Bernard's contributions, which you would not expect from a woman as thoughtful and unhurried as she was. These are enough to indicate the monumental scale of her contribution to Guyana and the Caribbean. For thus enriching our lives, The memory of Justice Bernard and her work and achievements will continue to inspire us. I extend my condolences to her family and relatives. Thank you, Your Honor.
I will now invite Attorney at Law, Mr. Nigel Hughes.
Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders, Madam Chancellor, judges of the Court of Appeal, Board of Guyana and Trinidad, judges of the High Court, all protocols having been so eloquently established, I pray that I adopt them. As we gather here today to pay tribute to and celebrate the life of one of our finest citizens, it is perhaps apposite to not only record the outstanding judicial record of Madam Justice Desiree Bernard, but also to pay attention to what she said off the bench by her in relation to the development of the law and the protection of the collective citizenry of our Caribbean. But permit me, before I start, to say a hearty welcome to the members of the Trinidad bench, whose presence is not only to be applauded on this formal occasion, but perhaps should be considered a feature to be deployed in the future of our efforts to enhance the development and cross-fertilization of our Caribbean common law. I'm assured that several of my learned friends who will address you this afternoon and who have addressed you will remind us of the outstanding achievements and innovative interpretations of law, which form part of a very long, impressive legacy bequeathed to us by this outstanding jurist. Any repetition by me may detract from the eminence of her legacy. With Your Honor's permission, I would prefer to venture into and explore the equally important legacy which we benefit from of the observations and recommendations for the improvement of our collective legal heritage left by the late Madam Justice Desiree Bernard. In her judicial career, which began in 1980, when Madam Justice Bernard was the sole female member of the bench, up until the year 2017, when the Chancellorship, Office of the Chief Justice, Office of the Chief Magistrate were all occupied by female jurists, is perhaps an unfortunate reflection on us that it took 37 years to achieve such progress. It is my hope that our future progressive developments consume much less time. Notwithstanding this lamentation, Justice Bernard, as early as 1991, in her address on the subject, and I quote, "the impact of English common law on the Caribbean society," unquote, offered these musings, and I quote, "Within recent years, the issue of human rights has become the focus of peoples everywhere, and all have been hastily climbing on the bandwagon. It has attracted international attention with the adoption and ratification of several declarations and conventions, and the creation of commissions and groups to monitor their implementation. All of these treaties guarantee non-discrimination on the grounds of race, sex, color, religion, and political beliefs, and most countries ratify them out of a sense of diplomatic duty rather than genuine commitment to the principles embodied in the particular treaties. Invariably, enforceability and implementation of all international human rights norms depend on the particular state enacting legislation, making them enforceable in the courts, or ensuring their nationals effective remedies for the violation of the human rights," unquote. Justice Bernard continued, quote, "Much depends, however, on the willingness of the judiciary in a particular state to give effect and meaning to the enshrined rights and freedoms. It is the responsibility of the judiciary to interpret laws and safeguard the rights of citizens, regardless of the consequences to a particular government. The time has come for judges to interpret international treaties in domestic courts in order to provide remedies for wrongs suffered by citizens," unquote. On the subject of the development of the Caribbean common law and jurisprudence, Justice Bernard, in the same address in 1991, proffered, and I quote, "Apart from international treaties and human rights issues, judges ought to give more liberal interpretations to certain aspects of the common law and not be hidebound to earlier rigid conservative views expressed by judges who lived in a different era," unquote. Justice Bernard further observed, "Who better can judge whether a chattel house on blocks in the Gap in St. Lawrence belongs to the tenant or the owner of the land, or whether a member of the Rastafarian religion in Kingston, Jamaica, or Kingston St. Vincent ought to swear by Jah or the Emperor of Ethiopia rather than Jesus Christ, or the financial implications of holding a box hand in Guyana, or Susu, as it is called in Trinidad and Tobago," unquote. And perhaps, most aptly, she said, and I quote, "We have failed in our duty to ourselves and to future generations of Caribbean people if we do not establish our own judicial institutions and develop our own jurisprudence, thereby bequeathing to those yet unborn a heritage of which they can be justly proud," end of quote. Her observations were not limited only to those of human rights and the protection of the citizenry. She also noted the antiquity of our divorce laws as far back as 1991. She observed, and I quote, "Guyana remains the only country in the region which has retained this peculiar concept of malicious desertion and is at present no more than a nomenclature for the concept of desertion. In the very near future, it may fade into history when the sole grounds for the dissolution of marriage will be irreparable breakdown based on separation for a specified period," end of quote. Perhaps when Robert Nesta Marley in another context so eloquently pleaded, "I don't want to wait in vain for your love," he did not have in mind the Guyana sistren and brethren who would fear how they would fare after the love had gone. After some 30 years, we in Guyana still look for maliciousness as a legal prerequisite for civil separation. Keenly aware of my potential trespass and the time allotted to me, permit me to read a tribute from the Chief Justice of Belize, Madam Justice Louise Blenman, a protege of Madam Justice Bernard, and I quote, "As we celebrate the outstanding life and excellent contributions of retired Justice of the CCJ and former Chancellor Desiree Bernard of Guyana, I pay respectful tribute to her. She was a sophisticated, kind, genuine, warm lady, also an eminent jurist and one of my valued mentors. She achieved many firsts and lived nobly. She inspired the female lawyers and judges to put service above self while maintaining high professional standards. Desiree supported and guided both male and female lawyers and was an excellent role model. She took personal interest in the professional developments, and for this we are ever grateful. As an outstanding jurist, her contributions to our region's jurisprudence is immeasurable. She blazed the trails where we follow. Though I'm saddened by her passing, I'm comforted by the memories of the beautiful friendship we shared as two Plaisance-born ladies. Sincere condolences to her daughter Caroline, the legal and judicial community of Guyana," end of quote. Permit me finally to offer to her daughter Caroline, the relatives of Justice Bernard from the firm of Hughes, Fields and Stobie, and the Hughes family our most profound sympathies. May it please you.
We'll now have the Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Thank you very much. Your Honor, Chancellor Cummings Edwards, Honorable Chief Justice. Permit me to adopt the protocol order, which was so wonderfully set out by the Honorable Chief Justice, the Honorable Attorney General, whose presence I also recognize. Chancellor, I'd like to thank you and the Guyana Judiciary for extending an invitation to me to join the bench at today's sitting. I very much welcome this opportunity to pay respects to our dear departed Madam Justice Desiree Bernard. My brief tribute is an adaptation of an address I had given some weeks ago when the CCJ conducted its own ceremony to honor her memory. Of course, I had known Justice Bernard well before we were both selected among the first cohort of CCJ judges. I had met at various judicial conferences in and outside the region, and I was aware of her impressive reputation both as a judge and as well an ardent champion of the rights of women. In the latter realm, she has rightly been credited with establishing a remarkable number of firsts. The mere recounting of all the various occasions that she led the way where no other woman had gone before gives us a wonderful insight into her accomplishments and her qualities, her caliber. But it doesn't by itself convey the full picture of the breadth of her contribution to the region. The questions which naturally spring to mind would be, how is it that she was invariably always the first woman? It's certainly not the case that there were no other women around from whom to select or appoint. So what did the appointing or the electing body see in her that made her, at the relevant time, better or more qualified or more fitting than any other woman? What are the qualities of hers that so stood out, both within Guyana and regionally, that time and time again, she outshone all other women? If we are truly to assess her legacy, these are the questions which deserve answers. And over the last 2 days, we have been receiving, and during the course of the sitting at the CCJ, we have been receiving some of those answers. I myself have been looking at the book that she published in order to try and cull, to divine those answers. Anyone who knew her, and even if you were not fortunate enough to know her personally, if you simply read the book, the attribute of hers that is immediately evident is her enormous humility. Although she attained the highest judicial post in Guyana, she carried herself no differently from the way she might have if she were, say, a judicial clerk. She carried herself with quiet dignity, with pride, confidence, but as former Chancellor Singh noted that I had said, without any airs or without any arrogance or any affectations, she never craved the limelight. And even when she was the obvious star, she always tried to find a way to turn the spotlight away from herself. In the book that she published, there is no chapter in it in which she speaks at any great length about herself or calls attention to any of her groundbreaking and spectacular achievements in a way as to promote herself. She was always very approachable. And so, of course, people of all walks of life approached her. She moved easily among the masses, and she gave freely of her time and wisdom. And I, in that sitting in Trinidad, recounted an occasion when, I don't know if President Byron was there, we went to a carnival tent, and she had been there a couple times before us, and she knew some of the performers, especially some of the female ones, and they were familiar with her. Yesterday, I recounted an incident when we had a hearing of the disciplinary tribunal of the West Indies Cricket Board. And during the luncheon break, she went out of her way to speak with the cricketer whose behavior had resulted in some charges being preferred against them. And in a one-on-one session, the cricketer opened up to her so that she got, and by extension, we got a good insight into what had prompted the behavior that resulted in these serious infractions. But that was the effect that she had on persons. She was able to get them to bare their souls to her. And I suppose this is why she was such a very effective mentor. And as we heard today, not just a mentor of women, but also a mentor of men. And several of her mentees achieved the highest possible judicial office. When she responded, and Mr. Hughes made mention of this, when she was elevated to the position of a High Court judge, she, in her response to the various accolades bestowed on her, she responded by thanking everyone who had helped her achieve the significant milestone. And then she expressed her sincere hope that her appointment, quote, will be the forerunner of many more appointments of women, not only in the legal field, but in all top-level and managerial positions in our country, unquote. In her finest hour, she was not thinking of herself. She was not even thinking of other female lawyers. She was thinking of all the women in Guyana who, whether through prejudice or otherwise, were not being afforded the, quote, top-level and managerial positions, unquote, many of them so eminently deserved. Undoubtedly, her worldview was significantly influenced by the international movement to rid the world of all forms of discrimination against women. The United Nations had launched this movement with a massive conference held in Mexico City in 1975. And that conference designated the decade 1975 to 1985 as the UN Decade for Women. A set of goals was proclaimed for countries to attain over that 10-year period in order to advance women's rights around the world. And the measures were geared at opening up a worldwide dialogue on issues that particularly impacted women, such as pay equity, gendered violence, discriminatory laws and practices in land holding, and other shortfalls in extending all the human rights men enjoyed to women. Justice Bernard threw herself into the achievement of these goals. And fortunately for her, she had a country whose leadership also took it upon itself to advance those goals. And as we heard yesterday, she served as both rapporteur from 1982 to 1984 and chair from 1985 to 1989 of the UN's Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Through her exposure to these experiences, she in turn impacted and influenced many of her progressive male colleagues in particular in the region, but also the female colleagues. As we have heard, it would be a disservice to her to think of her as solely preoccupied with her only championing the cause of women's rights. In a calm and understated manner, she was an ardent supporter of the development of a Caribbean jurisprudence that was, in her words, peculiar to our needs, culture, traditions, and regional objectives, unquote. This is a battle that still needs to be waged, given the common law we have inherited and the statute law we must constantly ensure measures up to the human rights laid out in the Constitution. Justice Bernard was always the first because she was well ahead of her time. She considered that Caribbean judges should not feel obliged faithfully to follow English common law or decisions of the English courts that did not appreciate the uniqueness of our own local conditions. As I pointed out yesterday, her magnificent address in Tortole in 1991, titled The Impact of the English Common Law on Caribbean Society, should be required reading for judges and legal professionals in the region. In that address, she painstakingly went through several areas of case law to demonstrate the anomalies and bizarre consequences that resulted from an unquestioning genuflection to all English common law. She said, and I quote, "One can never overemphasize the urgency for the courts of our region to develop a jurisprudence of our own by modifying or expanding the common law to meet local situations and the justice of a particular case," unquote. She also recognized, again, well ahead of her time, that international human rights treaties serve an excellent purpose in assisting us in better understanding and interpreting our own fundamental rights that are laid out in our respective constitutions. And she called on judges to apply these treaties in a manner that would provide remedies for wrongs suffered by citizens. The progressive views, it was also in this speech in Tortola that she boldly stated that the Privy Council is a court, and I quote from her, "It's a court whose swan song must be sung." Several of England's former colonies have severed the umbilical cord and established final courts of their own. But we in the Caribbean seem reluctant to leave the nest and fly away with our own wings. Our failure so far to have established our own final court demonstrates our lack of faith and confidence in our jurists and legal academics, unquote. With progressive views like this being held by its top judicial officer, it is no wonder that Guyana immediately acceded to the appellate jurisdiction of the CCJ as soon as the opportunity arose. Justice Bernard's passing is indeed a loss to the Caribbean community. But happily, she has left us a legacy which will continue to guide us. We will always remember her contribution to exalting and dignifying our civilization. Once again, I extend deepest condolences to her daughter, Caroline, and to the people of Guyana. Justice Bernard was truly special. May her memory always be a blessing.
We will now have the Honorable Madam Chief Justice Roxanne George, CCH, SC.
Honorable Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Honorable Justice Yonet Cummings Edwards, Chancellor of the Judiciary, acting. Honorable Attorney General, Honorable Judges of the Supreme Court of Judicature of Guyana, Honorable Judges of the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago, Director of Public Prosecutions, Chief Magistrate, Acting, and Magistrates retired judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Supreme Court of Guyana and Belize, members of the Outer Bar and the Inner Bar, esteemed speakers, Ms. Caroline Bernard, and other family and friends of the late Justice Bernard, and special invitees. I do now crave your indulgence to adopt the protocol already established. Good afternoon. We are gathered at this special sitting of the Supreme Court of Judicature in Guyana to pay tribute to a truly remarkable woman who, born on March 2nd, 1939, in the land of the mighty Roraima, was herself as mighty as the famous mountain in Guyana, having soared to great heights nationally, regionally, and internationally. It is thus fitting that the Supreme Court of the land of her birth and where it all began pays tribute to her memory, though no amount of words can adequately capture the stature of the woman whose life we celebrate. As we know, Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard, ORCCH, was a pioneer and trailblazer of the legal profession in Guyana and the Commonwealth Caribbean. Hers was a rich life of service unto her passing on March 28 this year. Justice Bernard was a humble, God-fearing person whose mission it was to bring out the best in persons, especially with her exhortations to always aim for excellence. Quoting from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, "Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them." All three of these accolades can be attributed to Justice Bernard. Having shattered the glass ceiling and unlocked so many doors, she was an inspiration to so many, particularly women, and more especially to women lawyers and women judges in Guyana and the Caribbean. Deservedly celebrated in the Caribbean Court of Justice Academy for Law publication entitled Pioneering Caribbean Women Jurists, Justice Bernard was a judicial officer who served in her home country, Guyana, from 1970 to 2005, the Caribbean Court of Justice in Trinidad and Tobago from 2005 to 2014, and on her retirement from the CCJ as Justice of Appeal in Bermuda in 2014. She also served as a judge of the Inter-American Administrative Tribunal based in Washington, D.C., USA in 2011. As we have heard, Justice Bernard is well known for her trailblazing appointments to the judicial bench, being the first woman High Court judge, Justice of Appeal, Chief Justice and Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, and on her retirement, the first woman judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Prior to this, as a legal practitioner, she was the first woman president of the Organization of Commonwealth Caribbean Bar Associations. Justice Bernard was a calm and dignified person. She exuded humility, never being one for pomp and ceremony, with the ability to mix with distinguished as well as ordinary people. Hers was an exemplary life of service, both on and off the bench, as she was a member of many national, regional, and international organizations. Her devotion to her Anglican faith was manifested through her service to the church, becoming the first female chancellor of the Anglican Diocese of Guyana, including Suriname. Just to name a few of the many other organizations in which she served, she was a member of the Council of the University of Guyana, the Toastmasters Club, the board of the Guyana Girl Guides Association, the Conference in the Affairs and Status of Women in Guyana, the Caribbean Women's Association, the Commonwealth Magistrates and Judges Association, the International Association of Women Judges, the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers, the Caribbean Association of Women Judges, of which she was the first patron, and was vice president of the International Federation of Women Lawyers. She was also, as we heard, instrumental in the formation of the Guyana Legal Aid Clinic and chaired the board for a number of years. Justice Bernard was a human rights and women's rights activist, not only nationally, but regionally and internationally. She served as rapporteur and then chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Her advocacy for women's rights resulted in the trilogy of legislation, the Equal Rights Act, the Married Persons Property Amendment Act, and the Family Independence Provision Act, all enacted in 1990, which primarily benefited women. She inspired me to apply human rights law in my judgments, for in a number of her speeches, she urged that judges be bold enough to do so. For her immense contribution to the development of law in Guyana and the region, and for her leading role in advocating for women's development, she was honored with the 8th CARICOM Triennial Award for Women. She was also conferred with an honorary Doctor of Laws by the University of the West Indies and an honorary Doctor of Philosophy by the University of Guyana. And she was accorded National Honors of Guyana of the Order of Roraima and the Cassie Crown of Honor. Justice Bernard was always ready to share her knowledge and experience. Her book, Reflections on Opinions, published in 2018, is a clear demonstration of this. It records her immense collection of speeches and addresses on the judiciary, the legal profession, women and children, and topical issues of the day. Her commitment to excellence was exemplified by her distinguished career as a Guyanese and Caribbean jurist. A strong advocate for a regional court as the final appellate court for our territories, she has left a rich legacy of jurisprudence through her erudite judgments, tangibly demonstrating beyond doubt the judicial scholarship that we know is very evident in our region. Reference has been made to her many judgments locally and at the CCJ. In the interest of time, I'll only refer to some local decisions. There's Pompey and Mahadio on another, Civil Appeal number 99 of 2000, where Chancellor Bernard, as she then was, elucidated on the refund of the deposit on the purchase price, where a contract for the sale of property was repudiated. Then Ramlal and Scotland and others, Civil Appeal number 86 of 2002, is an important decision given in 2004 regarding dismissal of public servants. The issue of prerogative writs was explored by Justice Bernard. And she stated as follows, quote, "I'm heartened by the fact that hopefully before much longer, the prerogative of writs will be relics of the past, and we can embrace new rules and legislation for judicial review," end quote. The Judicial Review Act was eventually enacted in 2010, but only came into force in 2018. But her prophetic words did come to pass. And then in Civil Appeal number 80 of 1990, Mangu and Jagmahan, Justice of Appeal Bernard gave the judgment of the Court of Appeal on the regulatory of a marshal's return, on the regularity, of a marshal's return on a levy on immovable property. As we have heard, in 1987, she was the founder president of the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers. Judge, as we used to call her, had a tremendous impact on us young women lawyers. She mentored us, sharing her wisdom, knowledge, and experience, as well as guiding us on what was proper, for we know she was a person of elegance and decorum. And even after she acceded to the bench at the Caribbean Court of Justice, she continued to take a special interest in the association. Sometime around 1993, when she was chairperson of the Family Matters Committee, she requested that I be a member of the committee to assist her. I learned so much from her during that engagement, not only about family law, but about human rights, particularly women's rights, and how to conduct meetings and hearings of a committee, how to respectfully interact with persons from all walks of life. I am a mentee of Justice Bernard, who actively persuaded me to join the High Court bench, and I am thankful for her tenacity in this regard, for I have no regrets. We are deeply appreciative of her exemplary life of service to our country, our region, and the world at large, for inspiring us to serve with honesty and integrity, in ensuring access to justice and in upholding the rule of law. That she so served while contributing so much to the social fabric of Guyana and the Caribbean, is testimony to her brilliance. The CCJ Academy for Law book highlighted, quote, "The life of Justice Desiree Bernard has demonstrated to us all that the desire to succeed should not only be for oneself, but for the advancement of those around you and for the community within which you live. Her example will forever live on as the pinnacle of what it means to pursue despite one's doubts and to persevere in spite of the world's imbalances. In being such a shining light across Guyana, the Caribbean, and the world at large, Madam Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard is indeed a woman worth celebrating," end quote. Justice Bernard will be remembered and will continue to be revered as a woman most learned in the law. This is another occasion on which I quote Justice Albie Sachs of South Africa, who said, "Death is more universal than life. Everyone dies, but not everyone lives." Justice Bernard truly lived in every sense of the word. I've also heard it said that, quote, "What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others in the world remains immortal." We thank God for her life, for what Justice Bernard achieved and did will indeed remain immortal. On behalf of my family and on behalf of the Judiciary of Guyana and a grateful nation and region, I extend sincerest condolences to my friend and schoolmate from high school, university, and law school, Caroline, and all other relatives and friends of Justice Bernard. Caroline, thank you for sharing your dear mother with us. May she find eternal rest and let light perpetual shine upon her.
The Honorable Chancellor of the Judiciary, Madam Justice Yonette Cummins Edwards, ORCCH.
Thank you, Madam Registrar. Honorable Justice Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Honorable Attorney General, Chief Justice, judges of the Judiciary of Guyana, judges of the Judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago, Justice Charmaine Pemberton and Justice Nadia Kangaloo, our Director of Public Prosecutions, retired President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Justice Dennis Byron, retired Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, Justice Carl Singh, Professor Kenneth Benjamin, retired Chief Justice of Belize, retired judges of the Supreme Court of Judicature of Guyana, Justice Leonard Sperry, Justice Claudette Singh, Justice Franklin Holder, Justice Diana Insinali, and Justice Brassington Reynolds, former speakers of the National Assembly, Dr. Barton Scotland and Mr. Ralph Ramkaran, members of the Inner Bar, members of the Outer Bar, Chief Magistrate and magistrates, members joining us remotely, and our esteemed Miss Caroline Bernard and relatives of the late Justice Bernard. Good afternoon to you all. We gather to pay tribute to Madam Justice Desiree Bernard of the Order of Roraima and of the Cacique Crown of Honor. She has been described as a trailblazer, a pioneer, an eminent jurist, a lady, a champion of the rights of women, children, and men, a doyen of the judiciary, a mentor, a mother, a colleague, and a friend. All epithets which rightly describe a dear daughter of the soil. I'm reminded by the words of one of our national songs, the Song of Guyana's Children, which one stanza goes like this, and I can assure you I will not be singing it, I will just repeat it. Born in the land of the mighty Roraima, land of great rivers and far-stretching sea, so like the mountain, the sea and the river, great, wide, and deep in our lives would we be. Onward, upward may we ever go, day by day in strength and beauty grow, till at length we each of us may show what Guyana's sons and daughters can be. Indeed, this song aptly depicts greatness for Guyana's children, and Justice Bernard imbued this quality and embodied such greatness. Born in the ancient county of Berbice, and primarily bred and educated in the county of Demerara, and working tirelessly in the counties of Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice, Justice Bernard was a true daughter of the soil. Her judicial career has been solidly marked by many stellar achievements. You've been told of her achievements as the first female High Court judge, Court of Appeal judge, Chancellor of the Judiciary, and the first female judge in the Caribbean Court of Justice. Her honors also enjoyed other appointments nationally, regionally, and internationally. And so many of these appointments have been detailed earlier by other speakers before me. But what I would like to say is that despite all of her achievements, Justice Bernard was always focused, and she did not allow those achievements to cloud her vision or to relax. In her book, Reflections and Opinions, Her Honor wrote, "There is a great disadvantage in being the first in any field of endeavors. There is no precedent, no rules or examples to guide and follow. One has to strike out one's own path and become a trailblazer, thereby leaving a path for others to follow." In like fashion, after being appointed as a judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Her Honor remarked, "I am conscious that this carries with it certain responsibilities, chief among them being the ability to administer justice to the people of the Caribbean region, regardless of gender." Her contribution throughout the Caribbean and Guyana will remain legendary. Her contribution to Guyana's jurisprudence in the field of constitutional law, administrative law, family law, property law, elections law, civil law, have all been highlighted early on, particularly the cases of Ree Hanuman, Attorney General against Jardine, Harold Danraj, and others against NBIC, Pompey, and Mahadio, to name a few. And in the Caribbean Court of Justice, the cases of Ramdas and Jairam, Shanique Marie and the state of Barbados and the state of Jamaica, Marin and the Attorney General of Belize. Her Honor's work did not end there. But before I go on to other aspects of Her Honor's work, permit me to quote from one of the decisions in which Her Honor gave here in Guyana in the case of re-application by Norton. In that case, Her Honor said this, and I quote, "It is incumbent on me to stress that at all times, respect for our courts and orders emanating therefrom must be maintained, whether rightly or wrongly made, and if not appreciated by laymen, is inexcusable when totally disregarded and contemptuously treated by a member of the senior bar. The distinguished honor of the senior counsel is conferred on senior members of the profession, for whom a high standard of conduct and decorum is expected. They are exemplars of rectitude who portray the time-honored virtues of honesty and integrity, qualities which should be emulated by the younger members of the profession. If disrespect is shown by them to orders of court, ought we to be surprised if young practitioners and members of the public behave in like fashion? The conferment of silk on senior members of the bar carries with it responsibilities, among which are upholding the rule of law and ensuring respect for our judiciary and judicial institutions. These responsibilities must be taken seriously, regardless of the circumstances, and there is no excuse for crude or insulting behavior, and such conduct must always be condemned in the strongest terms. Miranda continued, judges strive to dispense justice under severe pressures and less than favorable conditions. Very often, they make decisions which are not always popular. It is one of the occupational hazards, and we learn to live with it by providing always that we know we have decided fairly and in accordance with the law. However, we hope and trust that I speak for all members of the judiciary that we do not have to carry the additional burden of political pressure from any quarter. We are here to dispense justice fairly and to hold the scales evenly. Any political party or citizen must feel free to approach the courts and have their cases decided according to law. To put it simply, if the law is on your side, regardless of the identity of the litigant, you will win. If the law and judicial precedent is against you, you will lose. Justice must never be tied to political considerations and affiliations. If we, as a democratic nation, believe in the separation of powers, that is, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. The independence of the judiciary must be maintained at all times. Such poignant words from Her Honor, uttered in 1988, remains true even today. Scholarly, well-researched, clear, concise language in the judgments of Her Honor continue to stand the test of time. And there have been so many other seminal decisions of Her Honor which stand testament to her industry and her acumen. Now, Her Honor's work on children and women have been highlighted, or has been highlighted, and it still deserves some special mention. Apart from her caring nature, this beautiful soul was passionate about improving the lives and the livelihood of women and children in Guyana. And you would have heard of the various agencies with which she worked to champion their causes and to advocate for legislation to improve their lives. Her contribution to the removal of discrimination against children born out of wedlock and the constitutional recognition of the best interests of the child, the status of women, and their participation in public decision-making remains legendary. Article 29 and Article 38B and C of our Constitution speak volumes. As Acting Chancellor of the Judiciary of Guyana, I recognize the work of Justice Bernard. I recognize her contribution. I recognize the fact that as a former Chancellor, she has been a mentor to so many of us. I'm reminded of her words, and I quote, "Let excellence be the mantra that guides you throughout your life. Never settle for mediocrity." Today, the top judicial positions in Guyana are filled by all females. I'm happy to say that the office of Chancellor, Chief Justice, Registrar, Deputy Registrar, and Chief Magistrate are held by females. Justice Bernard, as Mr. Hughes said yesterday, would have been proud of this, and this is a fitting tribute to her given by the government of our beautiful country. Justice Bernard has played many parts Unlike the legendary character in Shakespeare, As You Like It, she has made her exit, but she has left a lasting legacy. And we are richer for the foundation that she has laid and the contribution that she has made to Guyana. We all proudly stand on her shoulders. I'm reminded of the words of a poem by David Harkins, which aptly describe the options available to us as we celebrate the life of Justice Desiree Bernard. You can shed tears that she is gone, or you can smile that she has lived. You can close your eyes and pray that she will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that she has left. Your heart can be empty because you can't see her, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember her and only that she is gone, or you can cherish her memory and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what she would want, smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. We smile because Justice Desiree Patricia Bernard has lived. We open our eyes and see all that she has left. We are full of love and thank the Almighty for the time He has allowed her to spend on earth with us. We cherish her memory and we will let it live on. To our sorrowing relatives, our dear daughter, Caroline, we extend deepest condolences. May your rich legacy continue to keep us all going. We shall now stand for 1 minute of silence. You may be seated. Madam Registrar, you are directed to make today's proceedings a record of the court and that copies be delivered to the relatives and friends of the late Justice Desiree Bernard. This now brings us an end to today's proceedings.
Court rise. The special sitting of the full court of the Court of Appeal now stands adjourned.